Have you ever felt like the walls around you were hiding secrets, whispers of things you couldn't quite understand? Imagine moving into what you think is a peaceful home, a place meant to bring comfort and safety. But instead, you start noticing strange little things. Objects subtly shifting in your bedroom, faint voices slipping through the thin walls late at night, and your roommate knowing details about you that you never shared. It's unsettling, right? You might wonder if it's just your imagination, or if something deeper, darker, is lurking just beneath the surface. You ever been in a situation where the very space you call home begins to feel like a trap? What you're about to hear might hit close to home for some of you. Stay with me, because what you will discover now can truly surprise you. A story where the ordinary turns into something terrifying, all happening within the walls of a house shared with someone you thought you could trust. I remember the moment everything changed. It wasn't a scream in the night or a shadow darting across the hall. It was something quieter, more chilling. I found a journal hidden in my roommate's closet, tucked away behind his clothes like a secret waiting to be uncovered. As I flipped through the pages in my own bedroom, the words described my daily routines, my private thoughts, even moments I had spent completely alone. But then I saw something impossible. Entries detailing events that hadn't happened yet, predictions written before they unfolded. My heart pounded as I reached the last entry. The paper felt strangely warm, as if someone had just touched it, and the words I read sent a chill straight through me. Day 53. He won't leave this place. I froze, breath caught in my throat, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. When I looked up, there he was, my roommate, standing silently in my doorway, a smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. That moment right there shattered everything I thought I knew about safety and trust. How do you escape someone who has been writing your future? The answer isn't clear, and that question lingers like a shadow, pulling you deeper into this story. It's in moments like these, when the world you thought was solid starts to crack, that you realize how vital it is to share what's inside. If this has stirred something in you, whether it's fear, confusion, or even a flicker of hope, don't keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below and tell me what hit you the hardest. Your stories, your feelings, they don't just stay here. They ripple outward, creating a space where others can feel less alone. It's that connection, that exchange, that breathes life into this whole journey. And if you find yourself wanting more of this kind of conversation, if you want to follow along as the layers peel back and answers start to take shape, give the video a like. It's a simple gesture, but it means the world. It tells me that this story matters to you, and it helps bring it to more people who might be wrestling with the same shadows. When you like and share, you're not just supporting a channel. You're helping build a community where honesty and vulnerability aren't just welcomed but celebrated. If you haven't yet, take a moment to subscribe. It's more than just signing up for updates. It's a quiet promise that you want to journey through the unknown together, to face those uncomfortable truths, and to find strength in shared experience. The heartbeat of this channel, the reason it keeps growing and reaching, is because of you and the courage you show by being here, by engaging, by caring. So go ahead, join this conversation. Because the story isn't just mine to tell, it's ours to live through. And as we move forward, every voice, every reaction will shape what comes next. The apartment felt like a refuge in those early days, a quiet bubble where the outside world's chaos seemed to pause. I had moved in hastily, caught between the demands of a new job that didn't quite pay enough yet, and the pressing need to find a place that wouldn't drain what little savings I had. The man I was sharing the building with appeared harmless, almost too polished. His smile was polite but never warm, his voice soft and measured, each word chosen carefully before it left his lips. He listened more than he spoke, nodding subtly during our brief exchanges, as if cataloging everything without offering a glimpse of his own thoughts. His room was meticulously ordered, every book aligned perfectly on the shelf, every surface wiped clean of dust, an unnatural stillness that suggested not just tidiness but a kind of control. He didn't rush anywhere. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, as if he were constantly aware of every sound he made. At first, I mistook this calm for kindness, a quiet steadiness amid my own storm of uncertainty. Our interactions were minimal, peaceful breakfasts in the shared kitchen, quiet evenings spent in separate rooms. But there was a rhythm to it, a fragile order that felt safe. But beneath that surface, subtle signs began to stir unease. The first was the way he watched me. Not with the casual glance of a neighbor, but with a steady gaze that lingered just a moment too long, as if he was trying to piece together something about me. Then came the small noises at night, the faint scraping sound by the vent outside my door, a shadow flickering in the hallway when I thought I was alone. He never spoke of them, never acknowledged anything out of place, but I found myself double-checking locks and windows, a habit that felt silly but increasingly necessary. Our conversations, when they happened, were sparse and measured. He never asked about my job or where I came from, but he knew details about my schedule, the times I left and returned, as if he had been watching more than just the apartment's shared spaces. It was unsettling, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. There was no direct threat, no obvious hostility, only the growing sense that I was being observed, cataloged, and perhaps judged. The building itself seemed to reflect this tension. The dimly lit hallways stretched longer than they should have, shadows pooling in corners that should have been empty. The hum of the city outside was muffled here, replaced by a silence that felt less like peace and more like waiting. I caught glimpses of him moving through the apartment with that same slow, calculated precision, as if the entire place was a stage and he was rehearsing an invisible script. Those first 2 weeks passed in a strange equilibrium. The apartment was clean, the routines predictable, and the danger was invisible. Hidden in the spaces between words, in the pauses of conversation, in the way the light shifted at dusk. I told myself I was imagining things, that my mind was playing tricks in the unfamiliar environment. But the feeling persisted, a quiet tension that tightened around me like a thin wire. I began to notice how he handled the keys to the building, how he seemed to know exactly when others came and went, slipping out unnoticed and returning with a calm that bordered on eerie. The slow steps, the measured breathing, the way he seemed to fade into the background one moment and reappear the next. It was as if he was not just living there but surveilling, collecting fragments of the building's life without intention to participate. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. No signature, no explanation, just a cryptic message written in neat, precise handwriting. Some doors close quietly, others never open. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it was enough to unsettle the fragile peace I clung to. I looked up and down the hallway. No one was there, only the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. From that moment, the illusion of safety began to fray. The apartment was no longer just a roof over my head. It was a place where the air seemed charged with something unspoken, a tension that hums beneath the surface of ordinary life. The quiet breakfasts and muted conversations were now punctuated by moments when the silence felt too deep, as if it was hiding something just out of reach. I found myself watching him too, trying to read the patterns in his behavior, the rhythm of his movements, searching for a clue that might explain the unease settling between us. But the more I observed, the less I understood. His calm was deliberate, his presence calculated, and the apartment, once a shelter, was beginning to feel like a cage designed with invisible bars. The days stretched on, each one folding into the next with the same uneasy cadence. Outside, the city pulsed with life, sirens in the distance, the murmur of late-night traffic, the occasional shout carried on the wind. But inside, everything was muted, controlled. The man with the polite smile and measured steps was no longer just a neighbor. He was a figure at the edge of my vision, a shadow whose intentions remained obscured, and the safe home I had sought was becoming something else entirely. At first, the remarks drifted into my days like a whisper I couldn't quite catch, a fragment of a conversation overheard in another room, or a detail misplaced in my own memory. "Did the burger sit well with you?" he would ask, voice light and casual, as if commenting on a shared meal or a mutual experience. The problem was simple. I had eaten alone at work, a solitary lunch that no one else attended. I blinked, trying to place where he could have learned that, but the answer slipped away like smoke. Then came the traffic. Traffic was bad today, right? Again, the question hung in the air, ambiguous yet pointed. I hadn't mentioned any plans or destinations, hadn't given any hint of my whereabouts during the day. The streets outside buzzed with the usual chaos, but for me, the question was a thread unraveling the fabric of normalcy. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something else, an unsettling precision, a knowledge that shouldn't have been there. The unease grew more insistent, creeping beneath my skin when he said, "You didn't sleep well last night." I hadn't stirred, hadn't made a sound, and yet his words landed like a cold hand on my shoulder. How could he know? The question wasn't posed with concern, but with a certainty that made my breath hitch. These weren't coincidences. They were markers, deliberate in their delivery. Each comment added weight to the atmosphere in the apartment, thickening the silence between us. I found myself scanning the rooms, searching for hidden cameras or microphones, anything that could explain this breach of privacy. But I found nothing except the ordinary clutter of daily life. Books stacked unevenly on the shelf, a half-empty coffee cup on the table, the faint smell of laundry detergent lingering in the air. In public, the man remained the same polite neighbor, his smile unchanged, his demeanor carefully neutral. But here, in the confined space of my own home, his presence felt like a constant gaze pressing from the shadows. I sensed it in the way he moved, the pauses between words, the glint in his eyes that seemed to measure and calculate. It wasn't fear yet. It was confusion, a knot of questions forming in my mind. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of the city and the isolation of the apartment were playing tricks on me. The mind has a way of weaving stories out of fragments, and I tried to unravel this one, to dismiss it as coincidence or paranoia. Yet the details continued to accumulate, each one a faint pulse of something unspoken, something watching. Late at night, when the streetlights cast long shadows through the blinds, I caught myself glancing toward the hallway, half expecting to see him standing there, waiting silently. The feeling of being constantly observed was a subtle pressure, like the hum of electricity beneath the skin. It wasn't loud or overt, but it was persistent, and it grew with every passing day. I began to notice the small inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in his stories, the way his knowledge of my routines seemed too precise. There was no direct confrontation, no outright threats, only a layering of information, a quiet invasion that made the walls of my sanctuary seem thinner. I was no longer alone in the apartment. Something else had moved in, intangible and exacting. Despite the unease, I kept my interactions with him minimal, cautious but civil. I couldn't pinpoint the moment when suspicion turned into certainty, only that it was a slow slide, a gradual tightening of a noose woven from words and glances. The city outside roared with its usual chaos, but inside, the tension was a different kind of noise, low, insistent, impossible to ignore. The man's knowledge wasn't just about trivial details. It felt like an inventory of my life, cataloged without permission. Where I went, what I ate, how I slept. Each fact was a piece of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. His presence was no longer incidental. It was deliberate, a shadow threading through my days with a purpose I couldn't yet define. As the boundary between observer and observed blurred, I realized the quiet moments carried the heaviest weight. The questions remained unspoken, but their answers hovered just beyond reach, waiting in the spaces between words, in the pauses that stretched too long. The city's pulse beat on, indifferent to the subtle red flags unraveling the fragile sense of safety I had once taken for granted. The first time I noticed something was off, it was a matter of inches. Literally. I would glance over at my desk and realize my deodorant had turned the other way, its label facing away instead of toward me. It was such a minor shift that I almost dismissed it as a trick of my eyes or my own absent-mindedness. But then I caught my jacket hanging on a different hook from where I always left it. The fabric creased in a way it hadn't been the night before. My phone, which I always placed upright on the charger, was lying flat, screen down, as if someone had picked it up and set it down carelessly. These changes were so subtle that they felt almost like a whisper, a barely there disturbance that made me question my memory and perception. At first, I chalked it up to fatigue or absent-mindedness. The city's noise, the long hours, the constant undercurrent of something unsaid. It all wore down the edges of my attention. But the inconsistencies continued, day after day, threading a quiet tension through the routine of my mornings and nights. I would straighten the deodorant, hang my jacket back on its usual peg, turn my phone upright again, only to find the same small alterations the next time I looked. It wasn't random. There was a pattern, a faint signature of someone else moving through my personal space without permission. One morning, I woke up with a chill that wasn't explained by the weather or the state of my room. The air felt colder, heavier somehow, and I was certain the door had been left open during the night. The thought unsettled me more than the cold itself. It wasn't just about an open door, it was the implication behind it. Someone had to have been there, slipping through the threshold while I slept, unnoticed. The idea settled over me like a shadow, shifting the atmosphere of the room from familiar to alien. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no disturbed furniture. Just these minor tweaks, the subtle rearrangement of objects that didn't belong to me. The absence of overt violence or theft made the intrusion all the more chilling. Whoever it was didn't want to be found, didn't want to take anything, yet still left their mark in these almost imperceptible ways. It was a presence defined by absence, a ghost in the mechanics of my daily life. The subtlety of the intrusions was maddening. It forced me to doubt my own senses, to second-guess whether I had really seen the jacket shifted or the phone flipped over. But the consistency couldn't be ignored. Each slight displacement was a thread pulling at the fabric of my reality, unraveling the illusion that my space was truly my own. There was an unspoken message in these small acts, a code written in the margins of my routine that demanded attention. I began to notice the patterns more keenly, tracing the timeline of these silent entries. They didn't happen every night, but often enough to disrupt any sense of security. Sometimes the changes happened when I was out, other times while I was asleep. The door, always closed firmly when I went to bed, would be ajar by morning, just enough to let the cold air in and hint at the passage of someone else. The corridor outside my room remained empty when I checked, but the evidence lingered behind the threshold. It became clear that this wasn't a random occurrence or a prank. There was intent behind these movements, a deliberate intrusion that respected the boundaries of visibility yet violated the sanctity of solitude. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside, the quiet was fractured by these slight disturbances. Each inch of displacement was a reminder that someone was crossing a line, stepping into my space with a purpose I had yet to understand. The weight of this realization pressed down on me, reshaping the way I moved through my own home. Every glance at the room became a search for anomalies, every night a test of whether the door would remain closed or betray the passage of a silent visitor. The invisible presence that hovered just beyond my awareness was no longer a vague suspicion. It was a tangible threat encoded in the smallest shifts of my belongings. The whispering had sliced through the silence like a blade, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't the kind of sound that drifted aimlessly or faded quickly. It was steady, measured, as if the voice was rehearsing lines for some unseen audience. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I stayed rigid, barely daring to breathe. The faint syllables of my name, drawn out and soft, felt like a code I wasn't meant to decipher. The wall seemed thinner than ever, a flimsy barrier between me and something unsettling. I pressed my ear harder against the cold surface, trying to catch more than just fragments. The voice repeated phrases in a low, monotonous tone, testing intonations, as if trying to master the sound of my identity. The rhythm was hypnotic, but it stirred unease deep in my chest. It wasn't random. It had purpose, intent. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the faintest sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, pacing toward my door. Each step echoed, a soft tap on the floorboards that seemed louder than it should be in the stillness of the night. I froze, every muscle taut, my breath shallow. The footsteps paused for a moment just outside the door. I held my breath, straining to hear what might come next. Then, without warning, they turned away, retreating down the hallway. The quiet returned, but the residual tension lingered like a shadow in the room. I lay back, eyes wide open, the darkness around me suddenly more oppressive. The knowledge that someone was so close, just beyond the thin wooden barrier, unsettled me in a way that no amount of rational explanation could soothe. The boundary between my world and this other presence had been breached, if only for a moment, and that breach had left a residue of fear that clung stubbornly to the edges of my thoughts. Sleep was impossible after that. Every creak and whisper of the building seemed amplified. Every gust of wind outside became a threat. I found myself scanning the room in the dim light, checking doors, windows, even the closet where shadows pooled like ink. The idea of being watched, of someone rehearsing my name and rehearsing my presence, twisted into a knot of paranoia that tightened with every passing minute. Morning light brought no relief. The mundane normality of the day felt like a fragile mask, hiding the night's unsettling truth beneath. I moved through my routine mechanically, the echo of those whispered words haunting every step. The wall between us was no longer just a physical partition. It had become a conduit for something intangible and invasive. Whatever was on the other side was learning, adapting, and that thought was more chilling than any ghost story. As the days passed, the tension didn't abate. The murmurs returned sporadically, sometimes faint and distant, other times close enough to make my skin crawl. The footsteps, too, would appear, pacing just out of sight, leaving an invisible trace of presence that I could neither fully grasp nor escape. The atmosphere in the apartment seemed charged, electric with an unseen current that kept me on edge. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes too. The occasional glance when passing by, the slight hesitations in casual greetings, as if they sensed the shift in the building's energy. Even the air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves absorbed the weight of whatever was unfolding. It was no longer just my experience. The space was becoming a locus of something dark and inscrutable. I tried to focus on tangible details, the layout of the rooms, the pattern of the floorboards, the faint scuff marks near the door, searching for clues or signs that could explain the disturbance. But nothing concrete emerged. Instead, the presence remained elusive, like a shadow slipping just beyond the reach of light. It was both there and not there, a paradox that refused to be solved. That night, as I lay awake once more, I realized that the whispers and footsteps were only the beginning. Behind the wall, something was waiting, watching, learning. Its intentions were unclear, but the knowledge of its closeness was enough to unravel the fragile sense of safety I had clung to. The boundary between the known and the unknown had shifted, and there was no turning back. If you've ever experienced something that defies explanation, where the ordinary becomes ominous and the familiar turns strange, you might understand the unsettling quiet that followed. It was a silence filled not with peace, but with anticipation, a tension that tightened like a noose around the edges of reality. And in that silence, the whispers continued. Let me know if you've ever felt a presence that lingered just out of sight, a voice that spoke in shadows but never fully revealed itself. The jacket wasn't where I expected it to be. I checked the usual spots twice, each time growing more unsettled by the absence. The apartment felt colder than before, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. I found myself standing before his closet, hesitant yet driven by a flicker of curiosity. The door creaked open, revealing rows of impeccably ironed shirts lined up like soldiers, their collars crisp and untouched. But behind those neat folds, tucked away in the shadows, was a plain cardboard box I hadn't noticed before. It was out of place, hidden almost deliberately. I pulled it forward, the thin layer of dust betraying its long neglect. Inside lay a black leather-bound journal, its edges frayed and worn, pages thick with use. The cover was smooth but bore the subtle imprints of fingers that had turned it over countless times. Opening it was like stepping into an uncharted territory, an intimate record not meant for casual eyes. The handwriting was precise, almost obsessive, each word carefully formed and spaced, as if the author were trying to capture something fleeting and elusive. Page after page detailed my routines, my gestures, my expressions, my most mundane habits. There were observations so specific that they felt invasive, like a constant, silent surveillance. He hesitates before answering questions, one entry read. Another noted, He checks his phone twice before leaving. These weren't casual remarks. They were detailed studies, cataloged with an unnerving thoroughness. What chilled me most was the mention of moments I had been alone. Instances when I was certain no one was watching, yet here they were, meticulously recorded. He doesn't notice when someone stands too close behind him. That line stood out because it resonated with a creeping paranoia I'd felt but dismissed. It was as if he had been there, in the shadows, always observing, always waiting. The journal didn't just capture actions. It tracked reactions, subtle shifts in mood, the way my eyes darted when I was uncertain, the slight tightening of my jaw when frustration bubbled beneath the surface. It was like looking at myself through a fractured lens, each shard revealing a different layer of vulnerability. The more I read, the more it felt like a map of my psychological landscape, drawn by someone who knew the terrain intimately but refused to reveal their own. An uneasy silence filled the room as I traced my finger along the lines of ink, each word a thread pulling me deeper into an intricate web I hadn't realized I was caught in. The presence I had sensed, the weight behind the silence, now had a name, a shape, but it was no less elusive. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a tool of surveillance, a quiet invasion of my privacy that blurred the boundaries between observation and obsession. I closed the book reluctantly, the pages whispering shut like a secret being buried once more. The box, the journal, the hidden catalog of my life. It all pointed to a reality far more unsettling than the casual mysteries of the city's streets or the anonymity of passing strangers. This was a personal dossier, compiled with patience and precision, and it demanded answers I wasn't sure I wanted. As I stood in the dim light, the apartment suddenly felt smaller, the shadows deeper. The air was thick with unspoken questions, and the line between what was known and what was concealed began to blur. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm, oblivious, indifferent, but inside this room, a quiet reckoning was unfolding. The discovery had shifted everything, and the silence now carried a weight far heavier than before. If the journal was a window into someone's mind, then what did the rest of the apartment hide? The subtle creaks in the floorboards, the faint scent that lingered after the door was closed, the way the light caught on surfaces just right to reveal something hidden. These were all pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly together. The night stretched on, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, as if waiting for me to uncover the next secret. I placed the box back where I found it, careful not to disturb anything else. Every instinct screamed to leave, to close the door on this intrusion and pretend I never saw it. But something unspoken held me there, a pull toward the unknown that neither reason nor fear could resist. The journal was the first fracture in the carefully constructed facade, and I had no idea how far the cracks went. The room settled into silence again, but it was a different kind, thick with anticipation, a quiet tension that pressed against my skin. Somewhere, behind the stillness, the story continued to unfold, waiting patiently for the next piece to surface. If you've ever found something that unsettled you, something that made the familiar suddenly strange, I'd like to hear about it in the comments below. Flipping further through the journal, I noticed something unsettling. The entries weren't just a recounting of past events but included notes dated days, and sometimes weeks, ahead of the current date. At first, I assumed these were guesses or perhaps wishful thinking, the writer trying to predict what might happen next. Yet as I read on, a growing unease settled over me. The entries were alarmingly precise, describing events that had unfolded with uncanny accuracy. One line caught my eye. Day 38. He will argue with his boss about the project. I paused, heart pounding. That very morning, I'd just come from a tense meeting where I clashed sharply with my supervisor over a deadline. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. I skimmed further. Day 42. He will dream about drowning. That was the night before, when I woke gasping, the sensation of water closing in on me so vivid it lingered long after I opened my eyes. The pages seemed to be tracking not just actions but even the subconscious, the inner turbulence beneath the surface. Then there was another entry. Day 45. He will ignore a call from his mother. I looked at my phone, the screen dark. Minutes before discovering the journal, I'd seen a missed call from her, one I had chosen to ignore. The words on the page felt less like predictions and more like a script written in advance, as though the author had access to some hidden timeline, a map of my life laid out before me. The sensation wasn't just disquieting, it was deeply invasive. I found myself questioning the author's intentions. Was this some elaborate manipulation? Had he been orchestrating these moments, nudging events into alignment with his notes? Or was there something more inexplicable at play? Some thread of fate or foreknowledge that defied logic? The idea teetered on the edge of madness, yet the evidence in the journal refused to be dismissed. Every detail matched, every future event documented before it happened. There was no pattern of error, no margin for doubt. The more I turned the pages, the more the lines between reality and premonition blurred. The entries grew increasingly specific, describing conversations I hadn't yet had, places I hadn't yet gone, even moods I didn't yet realize I would feel. One note detailed a chance encounter at a coffee shop, naming the barista and the song playing in the background. I hadn't been there yet, but the scene was vividly painted, as though plucked from some unseen script. A creeping paranoia settled in, tightening its grip around my thoughts. If this journal had predicted so much with such precision, what about the entries that described darker moments? There were passages that hinted at betrayals, accidents, sudden shifts in trust. Was I being led toward these events? Did the author intend harm, or was this a chilling record of inevitabilities? The city outside the window seemed suddenly less welcoming, its familiar streets now veins in a living organism I barely understood. I tried to find logic in the chaos. Maybe the journal was a journal of someone who had tracked me obsessively, learning my habits and routines to anticipate my next move. But some details went beyond observation: dreams, fleeting thoughts, intimate decisions. The journal wasn't just following my life. It was unfolding ahead of me, a shadow stretching into the future. The more I read, the stronger the feeling grew that I was being watched, not just by the author, but by the very narrative the journal spun. It was as if the words on the page had a life of their own, a force pulling me deeper into a labyrinth of time and perception. The line between what had been and what was yet to come was dissolving, and with it, my sense of control. I closed the journal abruptly, the silence in the room now thick with something unspoken, a tension that refused to ease. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent to the strange script that had taken over a corner of my world. The questions hung in the air, heavy and unresolved, and I knew this was just the beginning of a story I hadn't yet learned to read. If you've ever stumbled upon something that feels like it's written not just by a hand, but by time itself, I'd be interested to hear about it in the comments below. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken around us, as if the shadows themselves were gathering to listen. His smile didn't waver, a slow curl of lips that didn't reach his eyes, which remained cold and calculating. I could feel the weight of the journal in my hands, its pages suddenly heavier than before, like a burden pressing against my skin. The words I had just read were no longer mere ink on paper. They were a warning etched in flesh. He stepped forward, the floor creaking faintly under the shift of his weight. The air between us grew taut, charged with something that wasn't quite anger or fear, but a silent, impending certainty. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but my chest tightened as if squeezed by invisible fingers. The room was small, the walls lined with peeling wallpaper that seemed to lean in closer with every heartbeat, amplifying the tension. "You shouldn't have come this far," he said, voice low and deliberate, each syllable dropping like a stone into a still pond. His eyes scanned mine, searching for a crack, a sign of weakness. There was none. Not yet. The journal slipped from my grasp, thudding against the floor, its pages fanning out like the wings of a trapped bird desperate to escape. I moved to pick it up, but he was quicker, reaching down with a deliberate slowness that made the moment stretch. His fingers brushed over the worn leather cover, tracing the scratches and stains as if memorizing a map only he could read. "This isn't just a book," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's a tether." The word hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I understood then that whatever had started on those pages had spilled over into reality, binding us in a game neither of us fully controlled. Outside, the distant hum of the city persisted, indifferent and unchanging. But inside the room, time felt suspended, caught in a loop of anticipation and dread. I glanced back at the scattered pages, the ink smeared where my hand had trembled moments before. Each entry was a step deeper into a labyrinth with no clear exit. He crouched beside me, eyes flicking over the journal. "There are rules," he said. "Things you don't see until it's too late. You've crossed a line, and now you're part of it." His voice was steady, devoid of malice but heavy with inevitability. A sudden noise outside the door made us both freeze. A subtle shift in the rhythm of the night, a whisper of movement that didn't belong. The city's pulse seemed to quicken for a moment, as if responding to some unseen signal. I realized then that the threat wasn't confined to this room or to the pages. It was woven into the very fabric of the night, stalking the spaces between the streetlights and the dark alleys beyond. He stood abruptly, the smile fading as he moved toward the window. His silhouette cut a sharp line against the glow of the city, a lone figure standing guard or perhaps waiting for something unspeakable to unfold. I remained where I was, clutching the journal, torn between the urge to flee and the compulsion to understand what had been set in motion. The lines of ink and shadow blurred together as I tried to piece together the fragments of this unfolding mystery. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a signal flare, a call into the void that had now been answered. And somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the street lamps, the real danger was waking up, waiting for the moment to cross from the pages into the streets. He turned back to me, eyes narrowing with a mix of warning and something unreadable. "You thought this was just a story," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. "But stories have a way of becoming reality." The words settled between us like a shroud. Impossible to escape, impossible to ignore. The air shifted again, heavier now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. Outside, the city breathed on, unaware of the silent threat that had taken root within this room, this moment. And while the journal lay open, its final pages still waiting to be turned, the line between observer and participant had already disappeared. The streetlights flickered in the early morning haze as I stood there, phone clutched tightly in my hand, voice barely above a whisper as I relayed everything to the dispatcher. The cold air bit into my skin, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in threads of suspicion and dread. When the officers finally arrived, their footsteps echoed through the hallway, precise and measured, their flashlights cutting through the dimness like knives. I followed them back inside, heart hammering with a mixture of relief and apprehension, expecting to find evidence. Anything that would confirm the nightmare wasn't just a figment of exhaustion or paranoia, but the apartment was sterile, pristine to an impossible degree. It was as if the man, the enigma who had haunted the margins of my waking hours, had never existed at all. The walls bore no marks, the shelves no scattered books or trinkets. Where his room should have held the chaos of a hidden life, there was only the hollow echo of absence. The closet doors, when opened, revealed nothing but hangers spaced evenly apart, empty and untouched. The journal, the box, the very anchors that had tethered his presence to reality were gone. I stood in the middle of the room, the silence pressing down like a physical weight. It wasn't just the disappearance of objects. It was the erasure of history, memory, identity. How does someone vanish so completely, leaving behind no trace but a void? My gaze dropped to the bed, and there it was, a new notebook, pristine, its cover blank as if waiting for a story yet to be written. The first page bore a single line, inscribed with deliberate clarity, "Day 1. He comes back alone." The words sent a chill deeper than the night air outside. This wasn't just a game or a threat. It was a declaration. The narrative, whatever it was far from over. Somewhere beneath the surface of this immaculate facade, plans were unfolding, pieces shifting into place. The city's hum outside felt distant now, irrelevant to the undercurrent of tension that had taken root here. The puzzle wasn't about to solve itself. I moved through the apartment again, each step cautious, searching for something, anything, that might have slipped past the sweep of the police. A faint scent lingered, something metallic mixed with a hint of old paper and something else, indefinable but familiar. It whispered of secrets kept too long, of moments recorded and then erased. The air had a quality that defied the clinical sterility of the space, an intangible residue of presence. Outside, the street was beginning to stir. People moved past without noticing the quiet drama that had played out behind closed doors. The city's rhythm was relentless, indifferent. It carried on as if the blank pages had never been written, as if the man had never left a trace beyond that cryptic message. I pocketed the notebook carefully, the weight of it heavier than it appeared. This new beginning was a riddle wrapped in silence, demanding attention but offering no clues. The line between hunter and hunted blurred further. Each breath drawn in this moment was a step deeper into a labyrinth whose walls were shifting with every heartbeat. The cold seeped into my bones as I stepped back outside, the streetlights casting long shadows that twisted like questions across the pavement. The night had folded over itself, hiding more than it revealed. Somewhere in the vastness of the city, the next move was being made, and the only certainty was that the story was far from its conclusion. What would you do if someone wrote your future before you even lived it? If every step you took, every choice you thought was yours, was already inked in the margins of a story you didn't get to write? It's a question that lingers, heavier than the night air pressing against your skin. A question that doesn't let you rest easy. As the shadows lengthen and the city exhales its secrets, I keep coming back to the roommate. What really happened to him? Did he vanish into the night, swallowed by the same dark that seemed to rewrite everything around me? Or is he still out there, waiting to return with answers, or maybe with new questions that will twist the knife further? It's the unknown that gnaws at you, the space between what's said and what's left unsaid, between the footsteps that echo in empty halls and the silence that follows. If you've made it this far, you're part of this unfolding mystery now. I'd love to know what you think. Did he come back? Or did the story end before he could? Drop a comment with the phrase, "I stayed till the end," so I know you were here, fully with me, in this strange, unsettling journey. It's those moments of shared curiosity that make these stories worth telling. And if you've found yourself drawn into this world of hidden truths and whispered dangers, consider subscribing. There's a steady stream of tales where ordinary homes hide extraordinary secrets, where every creak and shadow might be the beginning of something deadly. This isn't just about scares. It's about uncovering the layers beneath the familiar, the things we don't see until it's too late. So if you want to keep peeling back those layers, you know where to find us. Before you go, a little nudge to like the video. It's a quiet way to say you felt the connection, the tension, the weight of the story alongside me. And while you're here, why not check out the next video? There's always another door waiting to be opened, another secret waiting to be discovered. No rush, no pressure, just a gentle invitation to keep exploring, one shadow at a time.